It's 2025. No one likes to talk on the phone. I get it. Phones are for ordering Thai food and shoes that don't fit you, but you will never return, or where you keep voicemails from your now deceased grandparents. But you know what? It's time to get on the goddamn phone and make some calls. I hope you have unlimited minutes because we are calling Congress every day, every hour. I have been so impressed by the fervor with which people have been calling their representatives, and it is actually making a real difference. Phones, who knew? Which is why, for a change, I have some good choice words for all of you who have been using your phones for good. Do you know that some days the Senate call center has been getting 1,600 calls a minute instead of the usual 40? And very few of them were wrong numbers, I think. For those of you who haven't joined the party yet, the U.S. Capitol switchboard phone number is 202-224-3121. Memorize it, 202-224-3121. Add it to your contacts. Don't send it any nudes. See something you don't like? Of course you do. Most things these days are unlikable. So say something about it. Call them. Don't run away from this moment. They can't ignore you. Ring a ding, mother fathers. This is Choice Words. I'm Samantha Bee. My guest today is the first congressman to be a member of Gen Z, and yet he leads as if he has decades of experience. Representative Maxwell Frost. He is so inspiring, and we need 400 more of him. I am also very excited to remind you to mention that I'm hitting the road soon with my new show, How to Survive Menopause, and I would love to see you there. Hopefully, I am coming to a city very near you. For the full list of cities and tickets, go to sambee.com and follow me on social media. Hey, why not? I'm at RealSamBee. I hope to see you there. And until then, take a listen, make good choices.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I just got back from Orlando, so it was good to
Okay.
recharge at home. And
Good. Well, how are people speaking to you? What are they saying? They must be
yeah, I mean,
freaking out.
people are really scared, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm getting a lot of thank yous and people asking what they can do. They want to see more of what I've been doing and what a few other members are doing, and so it's a mix of curiosity of what's going on, asking how they can actively be involved,
Yeah.
and then thanking for what we're doing, and then we've had a lot of roundtables talking with folks about what else we can do.
Right. Yes. Well, everybody wants to know, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, well, first, I want to say, if I didn't sufficiently thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to be here, like your extremely busy schedule of trying to save democracy. What's that?
Yeah, I know, right?
I always like to start every episode of this podcast talking about choice and what that means to people. And you're in a unique position because the choices that you make affect so many, they are so impactful to people you represent. So you just won re-election. Does that give you any freedom in the choices that you make? Does that empower you in a different way?
Yes and no. I've always felt the freedom to say what I want to say and do what I want to do.
Yeah.
Since my first election, right? And even before that, just as a person. But it does reaffirm what we've been doing. Because when I came in, a lot of people would ask me, are you going to be a loud person or are you going to be an effective person? And it was always that binary choice was always something that I rejected and that my team rejected, because we think it all matters. I have to be loud about a lot of things. I am going to step out of the norm a lot, but I also want to be effective in the institution. And I don't see it as a battle between short-term wins or incremental change and the big, bold transformational change we need. In fact, history shows us all this stuff works together. Now, it's a problem when people say, well, we need to take small steps forward at the expense of the bigger thing we need, that's a problem. And what also is a problem is when people reject any step forward in service of the big change we need. That's also a problem. And so by no means would I guess consider myself more of a moderate person. I'm a progressive, but I think in terms of like the tactic that I think we need in governing, I am someone who pulls from kind of all places.
Right. Well, you're definitely making the choice to be a very bold, very strong voice right now, which I think is what we need so much of. And so can you just kind of paint a picture for people who don't know, although I can't imagine how they wouldn't know, but what your last 3 or 4 weeks has really looked like? You're being so active.
It's a combination of a few things. I mean, first is like the incoming, right? Seeing what's going on, how it's impacting, first and foremost, my district. Sometimes I think people forget because politics is so nationalized that we are representatives, right? Now, and we represent our districts. And that first and foremost, those are the people that I represent. I don't really represent anyone outside of my district in terms of my job. Now, does that mean I don't listen to other people? No, it doesn't mean that. But, first and foremost, something about my district. So when Donald Trump does something, or when Elon Musk does something, the first thing in my head isn't how does this affect the nation, to be honest. The first thing in my head is how does this affect the people of Florida's 10th Congressional District? And so my calls aren't to like national people first. My first calls are to Homeless Services Network in Orlando. My first calls are to veterans groups in Orlando, the VA. My first calls are to organizations, the Orlando Office of Gun Violence Prevention, right? When the funding freeze happened, the first thing I did was make a lot of calls to local organizations that receive federal funding to ask them, how are you doing? How will you be impacted by this? And what will that impact be for our community? And what that allowed me to do is just a few hours after that funding freeze started, step up to a mic with a poster board of all the services that would be impacted and clearly articulate to the people I represent what this means for their life if it continues. Right. And that's first and foremost the most important thing to me as a representative of people in Orlando. Then the secondary thing to me is, okay, the broader picture, how does this impact the country? How does it impact Congress, my job in Congress? And what do people need to know and what do we need to do? So, for instance, when we learned that Elon Musk had access to our Social Security numbers and the central payment system of this country, which is just insane. The most important thing to me, though, is no oversight over the decisions being made or no understanding of what he's doing. That's the thing it's the biggest violation to me. So I said, well, I think we got to go to the Treasury Department. Right. And so, overnight, I organized about 24 members of Congress to pull up to the Treasury Department to try to get in. For people who don't know, the Treasury Department is really a part of the White House complex. It's right next to it. So security there is run by Secret Service. So unable to get in. And so we walked around the other side and we did a huge rally with over 1,000 people with MoveOn.org, Working Families Party, and Indivisible. And the question is, why? Well, why did we do that? We did that because before that, people didn't know that members of Congress weren't being allowed into these buildings. Before we did that, people didn't really understand exactly how shut out even their own members were. And so part of this is finding opportunities to educate the country and tell people just how not normal things are. I think a problem that sometimes people who consume news as a hobby have, which is like people like me, and I assume people like you, and sometimes the problem we have is we assume everyone's paying attention. And
we do. We want everybody to be paying attention. And sometimes I actually, I totally agree with you on a lot of things, but like the visuals are very important. They're more important than, like, even I watched 60 Minutes last night and they did, they did a big story about Elon Musk and the consumer protections, and they had showed the door where they have scraped off the logo. Like some person was standing there with like a little putty knife scraping off the Consumer Protection Bureau logo. Like and those are the eagle.
Images. Yeah.
These are the images that are coming out and they're real, and those can hit you in a way that's not esoteric.
Exactly. And those images a lot of times and those videos will have a bigger impact than any press conference can have, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm not saying don't do the press conference. I'm saying do it all, right? My old band director, Mr. Weaver, he used to make us repeat this all the time, and it was kind of annoying in the moment. But as an adult, I really appreciate it. We used to walk into band class and say all the things all the time, right? And that's like my big motto. It's all the things all the time, especially in this moment where, yes, we might not have all the power we want, but what I say is when you don't have all the power you want, you got to use all the power you got. And so that means taking a step back, figuring out what in every moment, what can we do to push back, to obstruct, to delay things in Congress in terms of our actual job in voting, holding the line, using every procedural motion we can to push things back. And then the second thing is, how do we communicate and over communicate and do it in an authentic way that hits right at what's going on? And I think that's another really important thing Democrats need to be doing in this moment, too.
Well, when you were standing outside the Treasury that you were not being allowed into, you did say, are we the minority or are we the opposition? Which I feel like is the exact right question. Do you think that people are starting to hear that? Do you feel like
I think so.
Something is thawing a little bit?
I think so. I think people are really starting to ask themselves that question and answer it. And I got that from, when you look around the world, the party that's not in power isn't called the minority. They're called the opposition party. Why? Right. Because you are providing the opposing view of the way we would govern, and what we would do and what we will fight to do. I'm proud to be a Democrat because I stand with the values of our party. But I think one thing we can do a better job at is stepping into, and not even just this moment, just in general, stepping into that oppositional mindset. And it's not just about telling people what's wrong. Because when you say being the opposition, I think some people would say, well, Maxwell, you can't just tell people what's wrong. You have to give people something to vote for. Well, that is part of being the opposition as well. You're giving the opposing view, the opposing vision of what we should be doing in this country. So being the opposition isn't just about saying no. Doesn't Pramila Jayapal always says that I love. It's not about being just the oppositional party. It's about being the propositional party.
Oh,
and yeah, I love when she says that. I steal it all the time. But I always credit her. But taking both of those things, that's what we need to be doing in this moment. And it's not just in the kind of vernacular of the election in 2 years. We can't wait 2 years to do stuff. We have to work right now. But here's the interesting thing about politics, I feel like, is when you're doing good work, it's also good politics.
Right. Well, one of the most frustrating things, or one thing that I think is very difficult for people, is the level of distraction. Yeah. Like as you say, people aren't usually, there's a small subset of people who are like informed, like overly informed about everything. Yeah. But for the most part, people are trying to live their lives and, they're like paying attention to the news, but they're like pretty involved in their own lives. And it's very difficult to absorb all of this. Donald Trump really governs by distraction and with just like a fire hose of stuff all the time. Yeah. That's the strategy. That's what it is. So how are you helping people to kind of sort through those distractions to know what the priorities are?
This is really important. I spoke about this a lot at my town hall. I recently had a town hall that, we could fit 250 people, which for a congressional town hall, so really good, 250 people. And within just a few hours of one email being sent out, we had over 600 RSVPs. So we actually had to shut down the RSVP link because it was so full. But we had about we were able to fit in a little bit more people in the room. We had about 300 people. We're going to do some more when I get back home. Two things. Number one, we have to be alert. Bad things are happening. Right. And not everybody's going to be okay at the end of these 4 years. It's just true. But I also want to give people maybe a bit of foundation to do their work on. And for me, when I'm in kind of periods of time like this that are very frustrating, I try to break it up into segments. And I've done this since being an organizer. It just helps me understand, what are the checkpoints. I used to play a lot of video games, so I'm big on checkpoints.
I love checkpoints.
Okay, so here are the checkpoints, right? Number one, the most impactful period of any presidency is the first 100 days. And in these first 100 days, we have two really big things that we're tackling. One is the tax bill. And then the second one, which actually comes first, the first one is the budget and budget reconciliation. And people should know a powerful president comes into office, sets an agenda, and passes it through bills. That's what powerful presidents do. They come in and they pass big bills. Why? because an executive order is something that can be undone by the next president, but it's also something that can be pretty easily challenged legally. But laws, harder to challenge and harder to undo. That's real power. And so Donald Trump really isn't a powerful president. And this is why he's trying to act like a powerful dictator through executive order.
Right.
They can't pass bills. Otherwise, we'd have the Doge Act of 2025, right? We don't have that. And I doubt that they could pass something that gets rid of the Department of Education in Congress. And so, but I'm not saying this to diminish what he's done. I'm saying this so people can understand that we actually have power as Democrats in the budget fight and in the tax fight. Why? Because they can only afford to lose two to three Republicans on any given bill.
Right.
Which means if we hold the line and they're still arguing and bickering, which they're always going to do, we can stop a lot of things or delay a lot of things. And so there's power in that. And that's in the first 100 days. To paint the perspective, when Joe Biden left office, I think we could probably name 8 to 9 huge pieces of legislation that were passed. Chips and Science Act, Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, this and that. Those bills were all passed in the first 2 years, the ones I'm talking about, because obviously we lost the majority. By the end of Donald Trump's first 2 years, right now it looks like he'll get a budget pass, maybe, and the tax bill, because it's kind of a must pass. Other than that, I doubt we're going to see any of this very extreme agenda pass into law. Maybe on the immigration side we will, because we're losing some Democrats on that, and we need to keep Democrats together on it. Right. So people should keep in mind, after the first 100 days, that like presidential juice diminishes, and that's part of the reason they say the first 100 days is the most important for any president. Then after that, we get to we're going to reauthorize the surface transportation bill, which is money that has to do with surface transportation and laws having to do with that. And if you care about urbanism and YIMBYism and mass public transit, that's going to be a time where we can all fight together, and maybe even in a bipartisan way on fighting for mass public transit. After that, we're in the midterms. Right. And so for me, those are like the big battles ahead of us that I'm really focusing on. The tax fight's so important. I know taxes aren't like sexy, you know what I mean? There's not going to be an ad that's like, I'm up there fighting for fair tax, but it is important, because what they're going to try to do is do what they did last time. Most of the benefits going to the top 1%, the billionaires in this country and corporations. They're going to saddle that debt on us, and they're going to make us pay for it by cutting things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Right.
So like that's the big fight that is like really here right now. And we continue to fight on Doge and other things like that.
Do you find it difficult to communicate all this with your colleagues? Because there has to be, there are a lot of people in Congress right now who you are, who you're talking to, who are in your own party, and it's a little bit of a gerontocracy, within the party. Let's not be dishonest about it. It just is. How are you breaking through? How are you breaking through to people who feel powerless within your own party, who don't feel energized to act?
What I've seen over the last few weeks is a lot of people getting their strength, and not even from people like me, but like from their own constituents and people within our party reaching out and saying, hey, we want to follow your lead. We tell us what to do. Or do something, or this and that. And I think that has honestly given a lot of people the energy needed in this moment to do what needs to be done. I'm always, there's a lot of us. There's a lot of people always pushing for different things. And I'm definitely one of the people that push for, out there tactics and being more aggressive. And that's kind of my MO and what I always push in any meeting I'm in with a lot of my colleagues. And I'm not the only one. But at the end of the day, I think what people really listen to is their constituents when they're getting calls, when they're getting emails, when they're getting those texts.
And they're getting tons of calls, right? Like they're just shutting down.
They're getting tons of them, yeah.
Even, GOP members of Congress are getting tons of calls. Like
now they're getting
systems.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. Now they're getting... Well, the question a lot of people had is... Because at first, Democrats were getting more calls than Republicans.
Right.
And I think when people read about it, a lot of people were frustrated at that. And what I try to explain to people is, well, you got to remember that a lot of the people making the calls are Democrats. And a lot of Democrats live in Democratic districts. And so when they're told to call their member of Congress, you're who they're going to call. And so that kind of makes sense. But, there's a lot of great concerted efforts to make sure that these, especially moderate Republicans, are getting flooded with calls. And we saw the videos from the town halls, right? All that matters. And guess what? Now these folks are in a tough place. One of them, I forget his name, but the guy who took Matt Cartwright's seat, which is a very moderate district, he had to make a post that said, I will not vote to cut any of the benefits my district depends on. Now, that's not enough. We need him to actually do it. But that means something. That matters. And I think what we're going to see is that this whole Trump honeymoon period is going to end. I think he's, the first sign of weakness is this budget. I don't think it's going to go the way they want it to go.
How are you seeing the showdown in March? Do you think that we're cruising toward a government shutdown? Like, people are still reeling that he took over the Kennedy Center. Like, at this point, people are like, what's happening in mid-March? I'm like, this is very important.
Yeah. And you bring up the Kennedy Center, something that's important, because I think to a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say, don't pay attention to that because he's trying to distract from the real thing. And I think we all need to take a step back before we say stuff like this, because here's the thing, that's real for a lot of people.
Oh, yes.
And it might not be as big as the tax fight, but I'm a musician myself. My dad's a musician, and like attacking the arts and culture, it's the first thing that fascists do.
It really is.
They go for the artists, they go for the comics, they go for the people who challenge us to see the world differently. And doing it at the Kennedy Center, which is really a national institution for that, is a big deal. It doesn't mean drop the tax fight and pay. We can do many things at the same time. So for the people saying, "Oh, well, it's a distraction," well, maybe the one thing you could learn from Trump in this moment is you can do a lot of things at once. Maybe take that from him.
Could do a lot of things at once. And I actually think that I'll add to what you're saying, because, and I've told this, I say this all the time, but I actually think it's very consequential, not just because of the number of people who are going to be uprooted and all of, the usual stuff that's happening all over, but because it really shows us where his imagination can go, and it can go to unexpected places in a way that is like viciously cutting in a way that a reasonable person would never imagine. You would never remember that he held on to a grudge from 10 years ago and made good on it. I actually found it to be extra disturbing.
No, it is. It is. But and to answer your question about March, so it's hard to tell. I mean, if I were to say what I do think that they are going to shut down the government. And the interesting thing here is we all know they hold the majority in the House, the Senate, and then they have the White House. So if the government were to shut down, it means that they shut themselves down, which is just, again, highlighting their complete incompetence and their ability to actually get things done. I'm a Democrat. I'm not going to vote on something that takes away benefits, and a lot of those benefits being earned benefits from my constituents. And no one should expect me to, for any reason. And so for me, we got to hold the line, vote like, who we are. But I'll tell you, if we're in the majority and we have the White House, the Senate, and the House, it would be on us to keep the government open, aligned with our values. Right. And so for them, if the government shuts down, they shut themselves down.
Right. Can you talk about the issue of overcompliance in blue states?
Yeah. I mean, this is something that, and obviously I'm in the state of Florida.
Right.
And I think something we've seen is there have been a lot of folks in blue states that I think have taken some things for granted. And unfortunately, now they're finding out that this can impact everybody no matter what state you're in. And I think we saw this before Trump was even elected, with a lot of corporations in blue states complying before anything happened. That's why, a lot of people have asked me, well, Max, do you think now there'll be a national Don't Say Gay bill, or there'll be a national this bill or that bill? And I said, well, maybe there might be, but part of the way that authoritarians rule is actually by scaring people so much into submission that they just do it themselves.
Right.
And so there might not be a Don't Say Gay bill passed through Congress. There might be, there might not be. But the function of the bill, is happening in school districts across this country.
Right.
And there might not be a bill that says school districts need to comply with ICE. But we see these school districts putting out statements across the country saying we're going to follow the law and do what we need to do. And that's the over-compliance. And that's why I think it's really important, no matter where you are, even if you're a blue state or a blue city. I live in a very blue city, the city of Orlando in the middle of Florida. But we don't take anything for granted, and even in our city, because we know that things can change for us day to day.
Or you can live where I live in New York City, where we have a mayor who has a literal quid pro quo.
Literally, yeah, a mayor who, I mean, probably let me say allegedly, so I don't get in trouble.
Sure,
but
allegedly.
could have a quid pro quo with the president of the United States. So you're 100% right. I mean, this stuff exists everywhere. I mean, corruption exists everywhere. And now's the time where we're going to be able to see which Democrats are real about their values and which ones are real about power.
Right. I'm going to be very interested to find out exactly who everybody was who contributed to the inauguration camp.
Oh, yeah.
The big party.
That's the thing, and my big hope for our parties, we walk away from this understanding just how these big companies and these big tech guys, Mark Zuckerberg, one of them, Jeff Bezos, I'm not sure there's real values there. And it's really about being where the moment is. Right. And so, you have a lot of folks who worry about pissing off these rich guys because then they'll be against us. Right. It's like, all you got to do to have them with you is win. Yeah, there's no values or spine there. If whoever wins, they will try to curry favor with. Yeah. So if you really, and for me, I don't want to spend time trying to win over Elon Musk. I want to spend time trying to win over working people. And when we win, these guys will come crawling to whoever the hell has the institutional power because they're always thinking about how can I make the most money. Yes. Maybe not Elon Musk, but all the other ones.
It's just always shareholder value.
Yeah.
And personal wealth.
Exactly.
And longevity also, they all seem to want to live too. Like
they want to live forever. I've been reading actually a lot about Elon over the last week because I'm a big know your enemies guy.
Of course.
And it's interesting. I think money's a big part of it. Obviously, he's so rich, but a lot of these guys, they think they're God.
Yes.
Like literally, they think that they are the solution to humanity's problems.
Yes.
And so that they also disregard any consequences to action. That's why SpaceX can explode, 10 rockets, and it's really not a big deal, but NASA can't explode one. Right?
Yes.
Or else NASA, and that's part of the benefit they have of being in the private sector and having so much money is the consequences to actions. It doesn't really mean anything to them. And that's part of the reason why Elon's doing what he's doing right now. It doesn't mean anything.
It feels very much like it goes hand in hand with an ideology that could very easily say, well, there's just too many people on this earth. For one thing, there's too many people on this earth. And then you're like, yeah, but okay, what's happening to those people? And they're like, well, that's not my problem.
Exactly. Yeah, because they have that God complex. Everything is so macro that humans are just kind of forgotten about or not a big deal. Yes. I mean, for him for so long, I think he wanted to leave the earth, actually. Because
I welcome that. I wish that he would continue to pursue that.
Well, now I think because of this, what's going on, I think now he's maybe redirected and thinks, okay, well, maybe I can fix this whole planet. And, that's just crazy.
What are the key areas in which you think that you can slow things down, block things, get in the way, create a legal battle? What are the key areas that you're focused on right now?
For me, the top two are the budget.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really big one because both on the policy side, of things we can do because Victoria Sparks has already come out and said she's voting no on it. What we're voting on tomorrow, which tomorrow we're not voting on the actual budget. What we're voting on is it kind of gives instructions to the committees to make a certain amount of cuts and stuff like that. Sparks has already said she's voting no. Okay, that's one.
Okay.
And then there's a long list of Republicans that have said, it's funny, either they're very on the right and they're saying this isn't good enough and I need assurances, or they're more moderate Republicans who are saying, I need assurances that we're not going to end up cutting Medicare or Social Security or Medicaid. I need more assurances on that. And so because of this whole problem, our votes become more and more important. People should know last Congress, which means the last 2 years, the last 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency,
Mm-hmm.
all the must-pass legislation, so the budget and different things like that, reauthorizations, they all passed with the majority Democratic votes, even though we weren't in the majority, which means that they had to have us or else it wouldn't have happened. Okay. So we have power in this moment where we will use, and that's on the budget. But also on the political side, it gives us an opportunity. Every yes vote on this thing, they're literally voting to cut Medicaid, to cut food stamps that go to their constituents.
Right.
And we have to be out there talking about it. I'm thinking about going to some of these districts too myself.
I was just going to ask you, like, will you go and speak to those constituents?
100%.
Because that seems like the most, almost in a way, beyond what can be done legally and what can be done through your work, but like reaching those constituents and being like, you have skin in the game, serious skin in the game, and you are giving it all away, and why? And
going there is important. As we've seen, I think Bernie Sanders actually went to a few of these districts to do rallies like this. And I think that kind of stuff is good because what we're doing, I actually used to work on like political rallies and stuff. And the rallies in events, they're for the people there, but in an even bigger way, it's actually for the whole community, because when the rally happens and stuff, that's how you garner that earned media locally. And so people are waking up in the morning and they're learning about this event that happened yesterday. Why did this event happen yesterday? Because my local congressman voted to cut Medicaid.
Right.
Or because my congressman voted to cut Medicare. Right. And that stuff matters, and it impacts elections. And so again, I think that we can't wait for 2 years to do anything. We have to do stuff now. But I think the added benefit is doing things now helps with the politics in 2 years too.
Do you feel like you were made for this exact moment? Because I kind of do. Like, I feel like all the work you've done has led you to this place where you have a very strong sense of like the exact next steps.
You know what I always tell people is I don't take myself that seriously, but I do take my job that seriously. And so I would say, like, I think everything I've done before this has prepared me for this work. Man, I do think for this moment too, but during my election, my first time, people always said, well, he's just an organizer. That's what all my opponents said. He's just an organizer. And then I get to Congress and I realize this is a lot of organizing. Like a lot.
Actually, it's just different level of organizing.
Yep, exactly.
How are you staying up to the minute informed? Like, what's your media diet? Are you even taking that in, or do you just constantly?
Yeah, there's a few ways. Number one, I get an email from people on my team every morning on,
of course,
important things to look at in terms of the district, things I was involved in, stuff like that. And I think that also comes from a service that we have that helps, which is really important. I'm a no notifications guy. And so I don't have notifications popping up on my phone. But what I do is I'm constantly checking certain websites and stuff like that. Obviously, a lot from social media, but straight from the news sources on social media. Right. I think a lot of times, people, I don't like to say like, oh yeah, I do get a lot of news from social media, because then a lot of people are like, well, damn, he's misinformed. It's like, no, but I get it from the actual news source that is reporting to me from there. And I think that's important, but also it's a little problematic too, because a lot of these local news stations are like being bought up by private equity. They're losing all their revenue. And then all these social media companies are using all their reporting for free. And so it's something else I'm trying to do personally, is trying to go to their website instead a little bit more to help support the local news too. So that's something I'm trying to improve at. But I do get a lot of it from social media. And then I'm signed up to a ton of newsletters. And every morning, my morning's a big time to catch up on a lot of the news going on.
Local news is where it's at. I always tell people, I tell all my friends, I'm like, if you have a neighborhood that you live in or a different community, you have to subscribe to the local newspaper. You have to. You have, even if you don't read it, it doesn't really matter. You can pay them $100 a year to help them survive. They're doing very important stuff that you are not paying attention to. They need to continue existing.
It's very helpful. Yeah.
You helped create the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which I gather has already been dismantled.
Oh yeah, that's gone.
Oh wow. What does the dismantling look like on the ground? Like, what is the physical act of dismantling a whole?
So, Trump in some ways is savvy, and I think he understands doing a pop in circumstance for ending the Office of Gun Violence Prevention might appease like 5% of people in this country who are craven and want to sell, about selling more guns and don't care if kids die. But most people would see that as a horrible thing. So we always assumed there wouldn't be like a executive action to end the office.
Sure.
What we assumed is he would just get rid of it by not staffing it, giving the office space to another person, and the website disappearing. And that's exactly what happened. It kind of just disappeared. There wasn't like a whole thing about it. It's horrible for many reasons. Number one, this office worked at getting money, resources to local organizations that are working to end gun violence. And a lot of people don't know this. Gun violence has gone down the last 3 years more than ever in our country's history.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Homicides by gun. My team can send you some of this information too. And I think we have to do a better job of talking about this because a lot of people don't know. Homicide by gun in a lot of our big cities has gone down by a lot. Upwards of like 35, 40% in certain cities. When you look at Boston, Baltimore, even in Chicago. And a lot of this had to do with a few different things. Number one, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed that helped with enforcement of the black market on guns, really holding these gun dealers accountable. And then it also had some good laws in terms of gun violence prevention. But it also put hundreds of millions of dollars towards community violence intervention organizations that work at ending gun violence on the local level. Orlando has one that actually started using federal money. And I, myself, and the Office of Gun Violence Prevention brought back $2.5 million to continue funding this office. What these folks do is they hire people who used to be shooters, people who have credibility in the community. And their job is to go out and identify who's more likely to be shot and who's most likely to shoot someone. And they actually intervene. And they stop the violence before it happens. In most of our big cities, most of the gun violence is actually done by the same kind of group of people. And a lot of these folks are in and out of prison and jail. So we know who we need to talk to. We know the folks that if we are to intervene and break the cycle of violence, that we can have more peace. And gun violence has gone down in the streets of Orlando as well because of these programs. And that office really led a lot of that work. The second thing this office did is they acted like a FEMA. After mass shootings, they would go to these cities and towns and help people learn about victim services, trauma services that the federal government has. They would help the local government navigate having like 6 or 7 federal agencies descend upon your town because something horrible has happened. And in fact, that's why last year, Marjorie Taylor Greene put up a bill to defund the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. I immediately went and spoke with a few different Republicans, and guess what? The bill failed. 7 Republicans voted to save the office.
Wow.
And they voted to save the office because they said, we know that it helps everybody. It's not it's not like a Democratic Party office. It's the nation's Office of Gun Violence Prevention. So I introduced the bill with Senator Chris Murphy a couple weeks ago. We're hoping, I'm going to speak with those 7 Republicans and say, look, I have a good opportunity for you. You voted to save the office. Now vote to bring it back.
Right. Oh, that would be great. I love Chris Murphy.
Great guy. He's good.
Great.
I've known Senator Murphy since I was like 15.
Oh, wow. Oh, really?
Yeah, because when I first got involved in gun violence prevention, I went to the first Sandy Hook Memorial. And I went every year. I went every year to the vigil. And so I've known him for a long time. Wow. And that's crazy. Now I get to introduce bills with him. So.
Amazing. Well, that is amazing. So the average person who is listening to this episode of this podcast, what are you telling them to do? What is the way that we can actually not just be wringing our hands and fretting? How do we put all of that fretting and body sweat into actual action?
I would say 2 things. Number one, join an organization, group, or collective locally. That is based on the issues you want to fight for or fight against. And I think this is really important for 2 reasons. Number one, community. In these moments, community is important. Isolation is what they hope we do. So if it's gun violence, look up, maybe it's Moms Demand Action. Maybe it's March for Our Lives. Maybe it's Team Enough. Maybe it's Giffords. I don't know. If it's housing, check out your local homeless services organizations. See if there's any advocacy organizations. Join and just get overly involved and meet the people there and become friends with the people. And that community is really important. Also for our personal, soul.
Right.
The
Yes.
second thing that does is it puts things in perspective. Right now, there's a lot of people getting a lot of news about what's going on nationally because politics is so nationalized, and that's important. But all these decisions have local impacts. And when you fight with a local group, you get to fight the national fight and you get to fight the local fight. And I think both are really important in this moment. Think about immigration, right? There's litigation. We're going to fight to hold the line in Congress. But at the end of the day, there are these workplace raids going on across the country. They now are allowed to go into schools and churches. They can rip a child from their school desk during the school day. They can go rip a grandma from the church pew while she's praying. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, puts a lot of onus on communities to build strong networks to protect our immigrant population locally, right, whether it's mutual aid, protests, or advocacy. So join a local group, get really involved. Some of the things those local groups might be doing are very local, but also calling legislators actually works. It's really important. Making sure that we're paying attention to a lot of these special elections is also really important. Building up ways that we're going to protect communities locally is also something that people need to be doing. Then the second thing I would say, after joining a group and getting involved, is educating the people in your life. At my town hall, a lot of people who stood up and poured their heart out. Like, I had a federal worker who stood up. He poured his heart out about how him being fired has impacted his life and the amazing job he used to do, how important it was. And he said, what can I do? And I said, man, I'll tell you, the most important thing you could do right now is go do what you just did in your HOA meeting. Go do what you just did at your church or with your friends, and give them that. Because I can go in front of cameras and talk all day, and I'm doing a lot of that. But at the end of the day, what I've realized over the last maybe month is we don't want to be the party defending the status quo. It's not about protect the Department of Treasury. It's not even about protect the Department of Education. It's about protect Head Start. It's about protect people. Right? It's about protect Social Security. And that's the things that really resonates with people. Yes. And so I think, it's not protect USAID, right? It's protect these programs that help humans. Right. And when we do that, I think then we start to win the day. And so taking our personal stories and letting people know in our community is important, because we cannot assume everybody's paying attention to what's going on.
I agree with you 1,000,000%. Storytelling is one of the most, actually telling your story authentically is one of the most valuable ways to contribute, because that's what takes everything from the macro and brings it into your life and into your skin. This was a great conversation.
This is great.
I'm really thankful to you. I think this is really, you speak with such total clarity, and you make me feel empowered.
Oh my gosh, well, you're already empowered, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on.
That was Congressman Maxwell Frost, and I had no choice but to look up one thing. He was talking about how it's no big deal for Elon's SpaceX to blow up a rocket because they have unlimited money and zero oversight. So how many SpaceX rockets have blown up? I found 5, but it definitely could be more. No thanks. I'm going to stick with NASA. Thanks for joining us. I'm Samantha Bee, and see you next week for some more choice words. Thank you for listening to Choice Words, which was created by and is hosted by me. The show is produced by Svea Baron-Reinstein with editing and additional producing by Josh Richmond. We're distributed by Lemonada Media, and you can find me at RealSamB on X and Instagram. Follow Choice Words wherever you get your podcasts, or listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership.